Most of you, but a couple of folks I don't know from meeting for the first time. I'm Doug Farrand. I'm currently serving as the president of a little ragtag Unitarian Universalist congregation of Orange here. So welcome to our sanctuary. We're going to get started by lighting our chalice in this moment. Are we recording, Karen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Behold the symbol of our faith, fed by differing beliefs, merging together to become one fine flame burning brightly in beloved community.
Flaming challenge, burning bright. Now you share with us your light. May we always learn to share with all people everywhere.
We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action.
May the light of this chalice be the light of truth. Or may the light of this chalice give light and warmth to our family on good days and bad, happy and sad. And may we feel the warmth spread from our family circle to wider and wider circles until we feel our family part of the one circle of life.
In times of light and times of darkness, may this small flame, sorry, let me get this different. In times of light and times of darkness, may this small flame kindle what is good in us and the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're gonna need a new candle.
Oh, it did? Uh-oh.
That served us for a long time. Is that still going?
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe another few months. So, for those of you who are not frequent guests here, little context, we're a 135-year-old congregation, built these buildings in 1893. And about 8 years ago, the congregation took a big turn. The congregation had been shrinking and was trying to discern what a feasible path forward was. And thanks to the efforts of many of our storied congregational members, some of whom are here in this room, Frank and Becky and Mindy, involved in the decision-making process, the congregation started an organization called the HUUB to open these buildings to the community and to sort of live up to what it means to be an anchor institution in the city. So we're doing that work, but in the meantime, our congregation has been slowly trying to figure out what the congregation's role is in all of this, and our campus and the organizations that inhabit and use the space to do their work. And so we've been hosting these monthly Faith+Works services since 2017, which is a while now. It's 7 years. Jesus. It's a good while. And one of the delightful things about having such a long series, having worked on this for so long now, however many, 7 times, we don't have one every month, but there's a lot in 7 years, is that we've had starting to get some speakers who are returning to us. And so not only are we coming to understand and deepening our understanding of collectively the relationship between our faith and our work, but we're also privy to the evolution of some of our dearest friends and colleagues and mentors, evolution in their own thinking around this. So, having said that, I'm really happy that we're welcoming back Dr. Khemani Gibson today. Khemani gave, I believe, the third Faith+Works in April 2017 on the spider and the lion, I think was the title of that talk. So very happy to welcome Khemani back today. I was Molly and I were in Philadelphia last night staying with some friends, and they had a copy of Barnard's new book, The New Saints, in their bathroom. And I was flicking through it this morning and reading it, and there was a beautiful epithet at the beginning of one of the early chapters, and I read it. It's by someone called Carrie Sealine, who seems like a really interesting person. I don't know their work personally, but I read this quote and it really made me think of some of the things that I know Khemani is interested in and concerned with in a number of different ways. I'm going to read this epithet by way of our opening words and then turn over to Khemani. So she says that the days are becoming indistinguishable from each other is a sign of eternity. The new world isn't that of waiting for the old order to reopen or the old economy to restart. It's to realize that the messianic age begins when we see that the essential labor is to love and feed each other, and to revel in the feeling of endless resurrection when we wake up and have nothing to do that we don't have to do unless we choose it and choose it in love. So that's your intro. I'd really like to introduce Khemani Gibson.
Well, thank you all for having me again. It's actually very interesting to be welcome. And I'm really honored. I know this means a lot. And thank you to the Faith+Works congregation, to the board, everyone that worked through it that's in here, for caring about what I have to say for a second time. And I think something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about as I'm currently, when I was here the last time, I was still in the throes of grad school. So it was everything I was concerned about was grad school and working hard and things of that nature. But then once you get the PhD, it's okay, what else can you get? What else can you do? And I realized over the course of the pandemic, as I was going through the gauntlet of the academic job market, I realized the promise I made myself years ago in high school of something I promised my younger self I would pursue the minute I got a PhD. And that was writing. The reason I wanted to get the PhD initially was because, and this ties into my first talk, which is about a story that my mother told me about Nancy tricking the trickster god from West African folklore, tricking the lion and tricking him into making believe act like a horse and embarrassing him in front of all the more powerful animals. The little spider tricking the mighty lion. And one of the things that I talked about in that talk was how we as smaller people working in our communities and doing good work, it's up to us to circumnavigate the powers that be that are oppressing and forcing us to not be able to be successful. So I've always loved stories since I was a child. And in high school, I wanted to experiment with writing. Of course, you type something up, you give it to your friends, and other kids find it, and then they're like, oh, this is boring. And as a child, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? And in that moment, as a 15-year-old, I was like, I'm gonna get a PhD so that I can improve my writing, and then I'm gonna write a book. But life happens, right? We forget the promises we made to ourselves. We forget these things that we had and made, we get carried away. And it was in where everybody in the world is renegotiating and figuring out what is life when we are going through this catastrophic, apocalyptic event, that I remembered. It's like my high school self literally saying, hey, remember what you promised me 15 years ago? Literally like, hey, you got the PhD now. And now it's time for me to be able to shine. And in many ways, that's the inspiration for this talk. And it was kind of funny when Doug reached out to me months ago, and then he reached out like 2 weeks ago. I was like, I don't know what to talk about. But then I started thinking about the book I'm writing and thinking about everything that's happening this month. And this concept of being reborn and rebirth, and like reincarnation, being born again, it really stuck out to me because it's something that in my book, I explore through some of the characters and them remaking themselves in bad and good ways, but also as an explanation for my readers and for other people, us as community members, how we are also on this journey of being reborn constantly, right? How we all are being invited or have the opportunity to remake ourselves. And that's kind of where I want to talk and start. And because I think it's important, right? So often we as humans, and something that I'm learning and growing from, is learning to let go of the things that we thought we need to hold on to because this is what other people gave us to carry. And things that we have been told, this is what you need to do in life to be successful, to get a certain place. And understanding that life isn't stagnant, and you don't have to be stagnant either. And you can change and be reborn again. So when I saw the date, like actually what today is, I was like, oh, okay. So today is actually, it's one of the interests that I have. I like astrology and astronomy and all that stuff. I think it's really interesting. It's like really ancient and stuff. There's a new moon. And historically, throughout human history, a new moon was always symbolizing a new beginning, right? It's when the moon is hiding in space, essentially. It's not seen in the night sky. In the book, there's like the really big opening passages, like the moons are invisible, and like the characters going through this kind of awakening, so to speak. And so often, a lot of religious traditions around the world, a lot of spiritual traditions around the world, the new moon is a place, a time to really set your intention for how you want to grow for the next 6 months, and how you want to transform, and what seeds you want to set down now. And I think that's something that for today, this is like the first new moon before spring, thinking of what do we want to set right now that we will hopefully reap in 6 months, right? Thinking of what do we want to go internally for ourselves, externally in our communities, and collectively as working together with each other. What intentions do we want to set? So that's one way I saw the connection to rebirth. Another is obviously the spring equinox, right? We're coming up on spring in like a little over a week. And yes, as someone that loves sun, light, and suffers through the darkness of winter with seasonal affective disorder and everything, it's always, I was telling my partner a few weeks ago, like, do you hear that? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, the birds, like they sound different.
Yeah.
And I think when you start and you listen to like indigenous people talking about this knowledge that they've had for thousands of years, and you start to pay attention to your surroundings, and you start hearing the birds are sounding different, they're singing a different song. Like I planted buds back, like bulbs in the soil back in November and October. Like, I don't know if these are ever gonna grow. I got them from Home Depot. And this week, I'm walking by, and I'm like, in between the weeds that are popping up, I'm seeing things popping, growing, and pushing through the soil. And that's a lot of them, right? I remember when I was in the soil, like the soil had never been turned. The person that lived in the house prior, he didn't really take care of the yard, he didn't really do anything else to it. So I didn't have a tiller, I had to get into the ground and like till it with whatever I had. And a woman was walking by, and she was like, oh, make sure you're putting it down the right way. Make sure you're putting the bulbs down the right way. And I'm like, yeah. And she was just so excited that I was planting something new, because no one else on the street really has flowers. No one else has planted or tilled or done that to their yard. So I think for her, it was nice to see someone taking care to put that out and to kind of, in this anticipation, that's something new was coming. So we have spring coming, where we have gone through the darkest part of the year. In many ways, like the dark night of the soul, we are kind of coming out to a point where day and night is going to be equal, right? We're coming into a place where there will be more light eventually, right? Things will start The birds will start singing different songs, things will start moving again, life begins anew. And I think that's something in our current society, it's very difficult because we have gotten so disconnected from the rhythms of nature, of the rhythms of this is a time for rest, like when things are cold and dark. Like we all know the realities of our world that we have to keep working or else we can't pay our bills. But even in those moments, understanding that this is, it's okay to slow down, like during the darkest parts of the year, and kind of go underground as these bulbs that I planted. And now we're coming out of that. We're coming into this period of like a spark, the promise of a seed of growth, where things are going to be able to start growing and being cultivated, where people are going to be able to start planting seeds. Like if you follow anyone online that's a gardener, everyone's starting their seed, like their seedlings for their gardens right now, getting things ready before, even though it might be cold, so that the minute the last frost hits, they could transfer things outside and start getting ready for this. So that's another thing. We're planting seeds. We're starting to see the things that we set even from 6 months ago coming into fruition now, right? So another kind of point to kind of reiterate why we need to set out new intentions for 6 months from now. And in writing my book, something I went back to is looking at a lot of mythology, a lot of religion, a lot of stories from other cultures that I love growing up, because my book's kind of very mythological. And one story that I like to particular is in ancient Egypt, the story of the sun god Ra is a great depiction of this cycle of death and rebirth that the world goes through, that the sun goes through, that we go through. So for very quickly, and I'm not a Egyptologist, but the story is that for ancient Egyptians, the sun rises and travels on a boat across the sky in the morning, throughout the day and everything, and then he descends across the horizon and goes to sleep as it descends and goes into the underworld. And it's up to the other gods that are on his bark, on his boat, to protect it as he travels through this night period of death, essentially. But then every day the sun rises again. Every day there's a new beginning. Every day the sun is reborn. And as in some of the darkest moments of the pandemic, one of the things that would really inspire me was this journey of thinking of the sun, right? Thinking of this life-giving warmth that we all need, right? That food is grown from the calories that the sun gives off, our plants that we just talked about, the animals that eat the plants. Thinking about like, and not to be like a millennial, but thinking about Lion King, the circle of life, and how all of these things are very connected. And thinking of how so many, like how we can kind of take for granted knowing so much more, knowing about the science of all these things. Yes. But knowing how earlier humans didn't have that knowledge, but they were able to correlate and understand that this thing that's in the sky is very important to sustaining our life. And it's why when eclipses happened, they were very terrified because the sun is dark, it's gone, right? What does that mean? And even thinking about astrology, it's like we're entering the eclipse season, as they say, which is another thing. Thinking about like the darkening of the sun is like a bad omen. So now when we know more about science and how the moon is coming in from the sun, we kind of take for granted these lessons of, or these stories of the sun going through this cycle of rebirth and being reborn again. But it's imperative that we embody it and understand it, because so many people thinking about the pandemic didn't wake up and see that sunrise again, right? And we take with those losses that we lost over those that we're still losing, take with those people that we're losing, thinking about how can we impact the communities and people around us, where people that are no longer with us are, like, how do we take their sacrifice and their loss and apply it to our lives so that we can continue to live and to continue to remake ourselves. So that's another point that I thought of. I think to kind of even drive this further home, Easter. Like the Christian world is about to celebrate Easter and the resurrection coming up. And I'm glad I'm in Unitarian versus church. Wait, so I cannot be like charged with being heretical. But I think as someone that grew up very religious and has been adjusting my own beliefs and how I been raised, one thing that stands out to me with the story is even if you think about the allegory of being dying for people in your community and fighting for the oppressed, what the story of Jesus represents, right? And this promise of rebirth and resurrection, that's important, right? Because this idea of like that being a final thing that no one can escape. There's this imperative, there's this like drive in us as humans to kind of imagine and aspire for more, that there is something more than the finality of death. And there is this, in terms of not like the physical death, but the emotional, spiritual disability to all constantly transform and alchemize ourselves to become something else, to become something new. So thinking of Easter, thinking of this the resurrection as another indication of people around the world are going to be thinking about rebirth. They're not going to know that they're thinking about it, but it is a crucial part that it speaks to the human spirit of we die and are reborn. Christians, the whole thing for my Christian church that I was raised in is like we have to be kill the flesh and like die to ourselves and be reborn anew, right? And while I might not agree with a lot of those things anymore, taking some of the lessons of how can I remake myself and be reborn daily, right? Similar to the sun setting and rising again. What can I do today that's different, that allows me to be a different person, to be reborn? So we have that. That's another. That's all just within this month, things that are coming. And as I was thinking of this topic of rebirth, of course, thinking about reincarnation, that is privy to a lot of religious traditions. And this idea of we do the work in this life so that we can move on and elevate to another life in the next life, so we never need to reincarnate again. And similar to the story of the resurrection, I was like concerned with how can we apply this to the now, right? Because I would say even for myself, the Khemani of 2019 doesn't exist anymore. Like he exists in some instance, this lesson that he learned was translated to the one that had to come into fruition in March 2020. But the Khemani of 2019 couldn't navigate what Khemani of 2020 did, right? Like, I think the big thing, and I'll put myself kind of on as an example, I spent so much of my 20s chasing the PhD because I thought it would give me approval and validity, right? Oh, if I do the PhD, more people would like me, more people would respect me, and so forth and so on. Not exactly understanding that my inherent value necessary. So 2020 comes around and I'm a finalist for an academic job, I'm feeling really good. I'm like, oh, this is great, it's another great spot, I'm gonna be great, they liked me. And then the world shuts out. Oh, my graduation's in a few months. I'm very excited for that. I'm gonna walk across the stage. I did it in 6 years. I did it. See, I told you all I could do it. And then the world shuts down completely. I had planned my defense brunch for April 1st, 2020. It was April 4th. My defense was April 1st. When we were getting the notices that NYU like, hey, we're gonna have to shut things down for 2 weeks. Everyone knows it's a 2 weeks. I was talking to my advisor like, hey, she's like, yeah, you should be fine. And I ended up doing my dissertation defense in my childhood vet, the veteran I grew up in. It was just like,
Here we are.
Here we are, this is it. And at this point in time, this is when Zoom bombings were going on and nobody knew how to work anything, so I used Google Meet, it was. And so I finished my defense, passed, of course, walked outside to my parents and said, I passed, and they're like, oh, yeah, but I'm just like so sullen, because for years, I had been banking on, this is gonna be the moment that I prove to everyone, this is who I am, and this is what I can do, and I have been right, and they have been wrong this entire time. And then in a very real way, because of something beyond any of our control, it was taken away. And I'm really grateful for my family, because they were like, come, like 2 days later, I was so big, it was really bad. They were like, get dressed, we're gonna go out. And they took me to South Orange Park. I got dressed up and they took pictures of me to announce to the world that I'm now Dr. Khemani Gibson. And I think that's one of the things, in that moment, this concept of rebirth even was happening then. Because in this kind of dying to when I had put the PhD and graduated, like I had built up all these ideas of what this PhD would do, ignoring my intrinsic value. And it took my community that saw that value in me to remind me that you have the value already, and we're gonna celebrate you regardless. And it allowed me to kind of come into this new sense of life as Dr. Khemani Gibson, as a person that wouldn't have been able to understand the full totality of who I am today if I did not go through that experience and really grapple with it. You put so much pressure on yourself because of these accolades, but you already had everything you need. Even if you didn't have a PhD, you are still this great person that has something to contribute to the world. So the person that existed in 2019 couldn't go into 2020, but the person that came out of that couldn't go into 2021. As I was, again, still, some of these lessons take a longer time to get. So I was like, okay, 2020 was a wash, but this year is the year I'm gonna definitely do it. So I went hard on the academic job market again. Didn't turn out how I needed. Got a job at a prominent university as a postdoc. Was not the greatest, right? I had built this place up as this amazing opportunity that would launch my academic career. And it really kind of, in that moment, I learned the realities of places that are NYU, the realities of other people who have different motivations. And in many ways, this kind of, it was like a coming out of the shelteredness that I had, like coming into the world and realizing like, okay, this is what the world is, right? This is what navigating this space is. And as hard as it is, I had to allow the parts of me that had been viewing the world in these rose-tinted glasses and with this kind of idyllic, like, oh, it's gonna be great, I'm gonna be a professor, and everyone's gonna love what I say. And I had to let that part that was idealistic in the wrong way to die, right? So this new person that could be like, what do you really want? Like, is this really what you want? Because the one thing they told me in grad school when I started, and I knew immediately when they told me it was not gonna happen. They were like, well, you have to move to get an academic job. You have to move to get a tenure track job so you can work your way up, and then maybe you can come back. And it's always hard to kind of say like, I'm grateful for even at that time, myself, my internal self knew that that was never an option for me. Because other people would have just like, oh, okay, whatever, not said anything. And I was like, immediately, no, I know I won't be happy anywhere else. I know I have my community here in Orange, my family's here, the work is here, all these other things I like doing. There's all these political issues going on in the rest of the country that I see that are gonna come to a head in a few years, and now we're seeing how they're coming to a head. I'm like, and just even thinking about what I knew about the field and how isolating and how demanding it could be, I'm like, I don't think I could do that without my community. So no. And slowly but surely, my other friends that came to New York and I made good relationships with them, they all left. They left because of the pandemic, they left because they got jobs. And for a long time, that was a major hindrance to me because I had built such a robust network in New York. I built my life up in New York. And then 2020 came, 2021, they're all gone. They're all gone. I'm like the only one left. And I'm like, oh, I miss you when you're like, they don't know that this is when the vaccine is just starting to roll out. Nobody knows when they're coming back. They start getting jobs elsewhere. And I'm like, well, who am I without these friends that I've developed over this time? And I had to, again, reinvent myself, be reborn again, right? And I think of how that is what a lot of us were doing at that time, right? We were rediscovering old hobbies, we were rediscovering people in our community, rediscovering what we wanted. And it was in 2021, I talked to my therapist like, I don't know, this academia thing, it just seems too much, it seems too hard. Like, I don't want to move, I know I won't enjoy moving, but I don't know what else to do. And she told me to make a list of what other fields do you think you would see yourself in? And the one thing that came up on that list that was actually impactful to me was writing and all. And for so long, I denied myself, that part of myself, right? I always thought everyone else in grad school could write better than me. Like this, again, all this like negative self-talk of like, oh, I can't do it, it's like too much, and I'm gonna put myself out there, and nobody's gonna read what I have to say. Mind you, I wrote a whole book my first year of grad school to deal with the stress. Completely ignoring that I did that. But I was finding all these excuses. And it was actually my partner that told me that when I was complaining about, oh my gosh, this postdoc, I can't figure out this research project, I can't figure out how to like turn it into a book. And he's like, well, it's been a year. It's been 2 years. If you really wanted to do this, you would have. And it was something that I don't think anyone else could have said to me. It's very blunt, as a matter of fact, at times. And it immediately made me start thinking of, well, what would I want to do if I could? And my teenage self was like, hello, I've been waiting this entire time. Hello, remember me? Oh, you're 2 years late. And it was there in 2021 where I started drafting story. It didn't become anything, but it was there with the seed of remembering who I was, but also taking that and adding into who I've become over the years, right? And starting to add that to what it started to become. And it was in 2022 where, even though that first book didn't take off, that the book that I'm currently working on did. And I began this process. As long as it's been, it's to write something I would like to read, right? But also to create the life for myself that I would like to see. And why am I talking about this? Well, I think one thing that we all get lost in the mix of our day-to-day is sometimes we have all of these dreams that we promised ourselves that we want to do, things that we would like to see, and we convince ourselves out of them because they don't fit into our life. No one's gonna want to read what we have to say. No one's gonna want to listen to us. That doesn't fit in with who I am. That doesn't fit into my position in life, or there's all these excuses. And this is where this concept of, again, being reborn comes in, because you can always start again, begin again. And you do not have to be stuck in the situation that you think you are. This, the one thing about life is change, is constant. And we have the ability to change and reinvent this. And so I started writing this book, in April 2022. And by April 2024, I will be sending it to my beta readers to be able to comment. And this is like the first time anyone else is going to be able to read what I have to say. That's not academic. That's something that's completely creative myself. And I wouldn't have been able to get here if I didn't let go, let the parts of me that had to die, so that the part of me that's here standing in front of you today can be, right? And I think it's always important to think of it on the individual level, but I also, as someone that's a community organizer, want to talk about it in the collective, right? We see our communities going through massive changes, and they're very scary in many instances, and a lot of people are worried of what's going to happen. I think we can allow for change, and we can allow for rebirth, we can allow for new life to be coming from things, especially things that seem dead. We can also allow that we integrate things that have been longstanding and allow them to guide us as our guideposts. We can bring in new ideas that have been long discarded because the people of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, things happened to them. They lost their will to continue to be politically active. We can bring those back and be giving them to the public that never heard them before. We can recover things that have been lost and apply them to our situations that we're facing today. There are so many people that are being crushed under inflation, crushed under a lot of policies that are going on in the world, in the country right now. And I think one thing that's great about Faith+Works, the HUUB, UFO, a lot of the organizations here at Orange, is that there is this drive and this desire to give to the community so that they can be reborn and that they can be creative. And one thing that I always tell the story, Mindy and Molly always tell the story of when I started working with them in Murmur, Karen, and other people. I didn't really have a good conceptualization of Orange. My idea was go to college and leave, right? I didn't see the gems in the coal. I didn't see any promise here. And that was the lesson. That was what a lot of, like, some teachers were actually saying on child, like, oh, you're too smart, though. Leave this place and don't come back. And it was after getting involved and learning more things about Orange and seeing what could be if we give to this city and allow people this chance to appreciate it and to revitalize it so that it serves people, right? And that it's not a cash cow or for someone's ego. Once I saw that, I was like, well, why would I leave? And this is when I'm in college and there's other people that are, oh yeah, I'm gonna move back to Montclair. And it was like, well, why are you moving back to Montclair? But I can't move back to my community. And then you see other people coming in and taking stock and like moving into your neighborhood and things are changing. And it's like, well, why should I leave and leave these places that are important to me when I have a voice and I have this power to contribute and give to this community and to see it being reborn, right? See it become something new that embraces its past, embraces the future, but is also something that serves all in the best way. I think we get caught up sometimes in thinking of only these narrow-minded fields of like, well, what about being mine? And that doesn't do us very good in the long run. Because then someone else that's more powerful than us will always come in and say, well, I'm really concerned about being mine as well, and you're not part of being mine. So your concerns are pushed to the side. So I think it's important for like places like this, the Faith+Works, the HUUB, to continue to question and think about how can we help to allow this rebirth going on in our surrounding community. How can we facilitate for people that come through our doors to be reborn in whatever they do? So thinking of what they're able to contribute to our community through the activities here, what they're able to do as members here, thinking of how we go out and facilitate conversations that people would have never had if they never met us, right? If I never met Mindy, Molly, Karen, a lot of people, I would have been very much of the opinion, who knows where I would have been today, right? I would be a complete like orange now, I don't know there, right? But because someone took the time to share their vision and the ability to vision a different orange, or a future of orange that is inclusive of me, a future of orange that is appreciative of its history. You have a historian that's a community organizer, a historian that's a writer, a historian that is constantly remaking and reinventing myself. Those lessons of being able to develop and adapt come from my lessons working in art over like 10+ years, right? And I think it's imperative that each of us, we have those, like, yes, we have the ability to do it internally, to alchemize ourselves, but we can collectively do it in our communities. And we can collectively change our communities for the better and allow them to be reborn. So I don't necessarily have much more to say.
What is your book?
Yeah, oh, you're with. So, my book is a fantasy book.
It's a what?
A fantasy book.
Oh, okay.
It's an adult fantasy book, and essentially, the concept of rebirth comes from the idea that the gods of this earth were killed by something, and they were reborn, and the world was kind of recreated anew. And there's this priest who is dealing with a lot of his own ghosts that he's running away from in the past, and he is tasked with trying to track down this thing that killed the gods because it has also been reborn. So this kind of cyclical nature of like death and rebirth, but also internal rebirth and external rebirth.
Quick question. I noticed your usage of reborn for yourself.
Yeah.
What was the first thought that came to your mind on how you was going to do that? Go about getting reborn?
I guess I didn't think of it initially until this talk and until like I started writing the book. Because I'm like, I think so often you look, well, I'll tell you exactly.
Okay.
We can tend to look at our past versions of ourselves with disdain, and like, why did I make that mistake, or why did I do that? And then someone online said, your past version of yourself was doing what it needed to do so you can be born today. So the version of you that exists today can be here. And that's where I was thinking, like, I had to shed those versions of myself, and like they had to die and be reborn, and to bring me to these. It's like thinking of a lobster, thinking of any a snake, even, I know people, but like the idea of shedding the skin is this, or even thinking of the ship of Theseus, if anyone's familiar with that thought experiment. Like if you replace each part of the ship, is it still the same ship, or is it something different, right? So on every iteration, you become a new person is what I believe. So as I've adapted and grown and learn different things, heal different things, I'm being reborn constantly.
I'm sorry, I didn't even.
No question.
Just one quick question. Do you feel as if part of your rebirth, your transformation, is because you may have been living your life to please others in the past?
Oh, definitely. That's definitely it. And I think as a society, as communities, that's kind of what we put on people. Like, you don't really have, it's only now that we're starting to have conversations about gender. Like, there were other conversations about certain types of parenting earlier, but now, like, people are more frequently saying it. I'm grateful to my parents. They didn't force me to study anything, but they did have certain expectations, right? I was in a very religious immigrant community that had certain expectations, and you learn subtly as a child before you even can realize that you have to do this and this and this, and that will give you would please others and they would respect you. So for me, and this is definitely connected to something I had to untangle with my need to get a professor job, and it was like a very big realization in therapy, I was always good at academics. So I knew in an immigrant community that appreciated people that were academically successful, that if I continued to do that, I would get the respect from others. And the things that I was insecure about that I knew the community might not like would be minimized to a certain extent because, oh, I'm academically successful, and they would praise me for that. Of course, as a kid that worked, right? But then you grow up and you're stuck because you're chasing after something, not because it's what you want, but it's because what you know what people that you used to be around would like for you or would appreciate from you. And it's kind of like interesting because when I, like my current position as a lecturer, thinking of a lot of academics, even one of my former advisors was like, are you sure? Like, are you sure about this? And I'm like, yeah, because I wouldn't be able to write the book if I was on the full tenure track. I wouldn't be able to write a fantasy book that I really was like, I was literally editing it today because I want to get into my major. And whereas with my dissertation, I was great, the dissertation was great, but it was a hassle to try to think of, okay, now you got to turn this into a book, an academic monograph, and then you have to go to do more and more and more. And then after you do that, you got to do more. And then it was really thinking in therapy where my therapist was like, well, why is this so important? And it was like, well, it's to please these people that I don't even talk to anymore. And that's where it comes thinking of like, well, you gotta let that go. That part of you has to die, and you have to come out of that skeleton, that shell, and allow this new you to be born from that. And again, I don't think I would be able to stand in front of you today if that didn't happen, if I didn't have those realizations.
Like a slightly not big question. So
I get them all the time in class.
But what you just said made me think about how one goes through these processes of being reborn, but how actually that could take you in a lot of different directions potentially. But one hopes that, to Anthony's point, that you're being actually brought closer to some sense of your true self. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how that translates then to that process of being reborn on a collective level, vis-a-vis like the role of the, sort of what you might say, you could talk about in the context of the role of the spirit in this process, right? And truth and values and how those kinds of things play into.
So can you just say the last part again? So the roles of the spirit.
Yeah, like on a personal level, it's very easy for me to think like, oh, like, as we go through this processes of rebirth, we're coming into closer alignment with some true sense of who we are. And it's like, yeah, I'm just curious if you have thoughts about how that then pertains to like some of this, we might think of that truth, that sense of like, what is the true self? And some folks use the language of spirit, some people might talk about values and principles. And then how that translates up to this collective level.
Yeah, I think on the collective level, you can't have this conversation without people, one, knowing that they have a voice and a perspective to be shared and listened to, and two, us avenue for them to be able to express it, right? So in many instances, so many people like we feel disempowered individually. We feel like, oh, I can't really tell my parents that I want to be a writer instead of be an A+ student because they're like, why? Like that's to pay the bills and all these other things, right? So many people, and just even thinking about my friends, they are thinking about local politics, national politics, thinking about just taking that as an example. They're so disconnected because they feel like they don't have a voice or a say in anything that goes on. Right. So much, whereas in the past, pre-1492, pre-1450s, where in communities across the globe, on some level, people can make their petitions heard, they can go to the chief, they can go to this person, they can meet communally and talk and share what they are thinking about how to move forward as a collective, as a community. Now we're at a place in our society where so many people feel disempowered. And there's actually, because one of the processes of getting a traditionally published like fiction book is to find comps, like comprehensive, like comparative books. And so I've been reading a lot of other fiction books. And there's this one interesting book called The Will of Many. And it's a really interesting concept that talks about the main thesis is so many people submit their wills to others to do and make decisions unknowingly and without thinking, because they feel like they are so disempowered. So I think as a collective, one, we really need to educate people and let them educate and empower people to let them know in a very similar way that happened to me in high school that, hey, you actually have something to say. And even if you think you don't, you actually do have something to say and to share with the world. Because you driving on that certain road to get to work, you might be the only person driving there. And you might be the person that sees, hey, there's a lot of trash piling up over there. And no one else is seeing it, but I'm the one seeing it. And you can share that in a way that all 99 or however many people live in the city can. So I think that's really important. I think we have to, and this is why the potlucks are great, and thinking of like events that bring people like that together so that people can share with their neighbors and connect in that real way. Because so often, especially something that we're seeing, there's a crisis of loneliness in this country. So many people feel disconnected and lonely. The pandemic made it worse. So many people passed. So many people are afraid to go out. So many people don't even know how, like they're even in my classroom thinking about so many younger Gen Z students are afraid to speak out and to even participate. Like there's just this different level of the trauma that we witnessed in the pandemic. So many people aren't even coming out and stepping out and showing. So we have to kind of, it's a big task that we have to collectively think of. How do we provide spaces for people to come and share their opinions, to participate, to give them the chance for them to be reborn individually in a collective space, but also by them being able to feel empowered that way. We can start having conversations of, well, I don't like this in my community, right? Or I don't like how these prices are going up and we're not seeing it reflected on our streets or on our corners, or why is it like where can I go to, and we can start having those conversations. If someone thinks that, you know, you have a voice and you have a community here that we are waiting to hear from you, we're waiting to support you. Something else that I've seen a lot of people talking about as we kind of get more and more, I'm not gonna get political, but more and more into the weeds of, let's say, capitalism, for lack of a better term, is some people have been talking about how in Amish country and Eastern Europe back in the day, across the world, you would help people, right? So we would raise the bar together, and then we would build the newlyweds a house under the expectation that, okay, when someone else gets married, you contribute as well, right? So thinking of bringing some of, like that point that I made of bringing some of these things back. Like how can we collectively start saying like, you know, things are getting really expensive. How can we share the cost in some ways to survive this collectively? How can we like build mutual aid to help people out so that they know that they have a community here, right? Like, I'm sure if, like, for instance, someone got like a Costco card and he's like, hey, I'm going to Costco, who wants to come with me? We can go get stuff together and we can split the costs. Like that might be helpful for some mother who has like kids or something like that. Thinking of like how we can do like collective, we might not be able to get a plot of land for a community garden, but if you have a backyard and you know you're not using it, well, hey, why don't you come in and make it a garden and we can get some kids in here and they can help and they can learn about these different things. We can work in the Ben Jones community garden, like kind of figuring out ways that we can circumnavigate the system that we do have to bring back some of these traditions that sustain humans for thousands of years. Like, I think that's in the similar as how I started this talk about talking about spring and everything like that. we as a species survived for many millennia in conjunction with nature and learning from it and being able to appreciate it and work with it and work with each other. And I think like there's been this whole talk of, there was like a, just as an anecdote, there was a woman online that was complaining about, her friend was telling her, you have a lemon tree outside, why are you going to buy lemons, right? Like, and she's like, nothing has to be done to it, no, these are the lemons. And it's kind of how we are very disconnected from a lot of these intricate things that, not even intricate, like disconnected to things that sustain us in a very real way. And I think we can bring some of that back. So I think just even the Costco card, like literally, what if you could afford the Costco membership and you know you're not gonna take, I don't even know, all the cereal. Hey, I know you need some help. Let's go to Costco, we'll split the cost and divvy it up. Something that Jamaicans do and a lot of people of like West African origin and the Caribbean, before Black people were allowed to put their money in banks, they would collectively bank together. Every week, someone would put $100, they would all, like 12 of them would put $100 in a pot, and that would go to one person, and it would cycle around the entire way, and people were able to buy houses like that. There's a lot of different methods that existed that people use. And I think in the rush to be individuals and to be individualistic, we have kind of lost that. But in this question of thinking about how we can be reborn, like for me, being reborn is not like throwing away everything. Because there's still parts of you, like the snake shed the skills, but it still has all the internal organs that are still the same, right? So it's about leaving behind what does no longer serve you, but carrying forward what will, or even reinterpreting and bringing back things that will be. So I think that's something that can collectively help in a very real physical way, because it's hard. It's hard not to see how many people are struggling and hurting right now and are crying out for an alternative, right? So I think it's up to us to really dig deep and come back. And I guess this is the other part I will say to this point, but to something that I've been thinking of, is we have to imagine better, right? So one of the first things that I remember in elementary school, I would be so excited for free time because I'd be able to create whatever I wanted. And there's this, I remember I wrote this a while ago, like being creative is the closest you can be to the divine, because you are literally birthing something from nothing in a very real way. And so many children have that energy, right? Music, art, and it's because of the society we're in, it gets conditioned out of us. Yeah. That this creativity can't exist because it needs to make money, it needs to do this. And by the time we become adults, we are kind of conditioned and we're on this rat race of, well, we can't imagine anything else. This is the way the world is. And I think one thing we, even on a small level, need to do as a society is to start imagining what could happen if this is different. Like, what if it didn't have to be this way? Like, what would that look like? Like, what if there was a fruit, like fruit trees were on our street and we could literally pick it, like, and people weren't going hungry? What if, and we weren't all suffering because the Bradford pears are killing us because they're only one gender? Like, imagining small things like that. Like, what if we did have community gardens that were shared plots and things of that nature? We might not be able to get the city on board, but if someone is like, hey, I got a backyard and I'm not using it, and I don't want to, like, how can we make this a permaculture food forest like the indigenous people that lived here did for thousands of years? That it takes care of itself, and that there's no pests, there's all of this stuff. So I think another part of this like rebirth is like opening ourselves to the imagination that we inherently have, this creative energy that we all have, that we have been told we can't use or we're not supposed to use, because it only serves certain people when we get surrendered. It's such a powerful engine, like something that I've been realizing in this creative process of writing this book is just how powerful thinking of how you create a world is, how these ideas that I'm putting into a text will hopefully help someone else to learn the lessons that I had to learn the hard way, that they might not have to learn it that way. Like we are even starved as a nation because so many people are now thinking that reading doesn't matter and that reading is not important. Like I was literally joking on Facebook yesterday, we don't need just Reading Rainbow to come back for kids, but we need it for adults too. Because people need to, like there's a certain thing where you read and you learn this empathy that about to others that are not yourself, that I think we're also losing. So I would say imagining also, being open to this creative idea of like what else can be is important.
What made you decide to go there? I'm thinking about that myself. I just haven't gotten here.
I think what made me decide was I knew something was off. I knew I wasn't where I could be. I didn't know what it was. Huh?
Not looking to you.
Yeah, I think there was like a block that was stopping me. And for me, like, I knew there was a block. I knew there was something holding me back that I couldn't navigate by myself. Or something I wanted to fix. And well, several things that I wanted to work with. So that's what drove me there. And I've been so thankful for my therapist I've known for several years. And sometimes I remember sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on, nothing's happening. But then a week later, it's like all those 4 weeks of just having the same conversation, and there's a major revolution that like undoes like 5 years of like trauma. And that's kind of been the thing that's been really like seeing stuff that is so buried that I hadn't acknowledged or that I've been ignoring, seeing how it can be undone by having someone that's a trained professional. Because the truth is, when you tell your friends and family, they're either gonna wanna, well, depending on who they are, they're either gonna be like, well, that's like, shut it up, or they will like engage you, encourage you in your worst ways, or they're not gonna be very helpful. So having like a trained professional be able to, well, or think of it this way, or be able to someone that knows all of your triggers and be able to counteract them has been really helpful for me.
I think that's what I need to.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Well,
I know it's time to end. I just want to say that I'm writing a book about K-drama. I think I've told you about this, and it's Korea. And K-drama is basically what you just described. And it's K, yeah. Oh. But it's a really very different story. And at the heart of that, those stories from Korea is that the suffering individual gets some help to emerge, be reborn, you might say. But they don't just get reborn, they then say, okay, now I gotta help the community.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I love your story. I particularly love that the man is gonna go save the gods. That's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a regular person has to go see all power. Yeah. So
That's cool. I can't wait to read your book. Thank you.
Yeah, me either.
we're gonna have some tea and cookies and things next door, so
Okay.
we'll have more questions yet, Khemani, but maybe we can do.
I think we're I tried to donate my backyard 8 years ago, but nobody's ever taken me up on it. Still there.